Hello, I'm back. We're doing a little more reading. Oh gosh, I should probably have some water because I've been a little coughing lately. Hopefully you guys will stick with me. So we're doing chapter 4 today of Books and Islands in Ojibwe country. And last time I had meant to do chapter 4, but chapter 3 was really long. And so it was so long that I decided just to stop one chapter. So today I'm going to go back and I'm going to do chapter 4. And again, for people who might not be familiar with this book, it's by Louise Erdrich. And it's sort of a memoir of, she's an Indigenous author. I believe she's Lakota, but living in the Twin Cities area. She has a great bookstore called Birch Bark Books. And this book, it's not a very long book. Essentially, it talks about a trip that she made to the Great Lakes area and Ojibwe culture and sort of the animist aspect of the lakes and the rocks and the trees. And in the last chapters, there were some really good sections. Actually, one, I might just reread it because I actually added it to the last bit of a blog post I made last night. And it's sort of just about like navigating difficult life circumstances and relationships. And I think, I never have them like where I want them. But there's this book that I have that's about metaphysics. Oh, it's probably over in the other pile. And it's by this guy. It talks about the work of this Edward Dewey. And he was hired by Herbert Hoover to study cycles and the foundation for the study of cycles. And so he's talking about cycles and cycles over time. And this is actually his daughter's. And I haven't read this one yet. But it's sort of in line with the idea of sort of holographic, like field theory, holographic reality, and space-time and these frequency waves, how matter is these waves that sort of keep going and they can be harmonized. So when I was reading the part about the lake and sort of navigating rough waters and that sort of thing, it really stood out. So I'm just going to reread this one section about waves, and definitely check out my my blog post from, I guess it's late last night, if you're interested in seeing it in context. So waves. On our way to visit the island and the eternal sands, we experience a confluence of shifting winds and waves. Tabasanaquit, that's her partner, shows me how the waves are creating underwaves and counterwaves. The rough swells from the southeast are bouncing against the rocky shores, which he avoids. And the wooded lands and shores will absorb the force of the waves and not send them back out to create confusion. Heading towards open water, we travel behind the farthest island, also a wave cutter. And we slice right into the waves when possible, but we are dealing with yesterday's wind, a strong north wind, and swells underneath the waves now proceeding from that wind that shifted fresh to the south. And I think of what Tapasanaquit's father said, and this is the thing. The creator is the lake, and we are the waves on the lake. And so, and the image of complexity and shifting mutability of human nature is very clear today. And so I just love that image, that idea of the lake and the waves, and that we are connected, our fates are connected, and it's complex, it's complicated, and the mutability, the aspect of changeability of humans is important and relevant to what I just posted. So, okay, so that was from chapter 3. So now I moved on to chapter 4. I think we're going to get to the book island, which is really cool. Like, there's a part of me that I really would love to go see this place. So chapter 4 is books. The Skylark Motel. Weary Kitsikok, that's her 18-month-old baby, and I stop at a spot just off the highway, one of those square tubes of rooms facing the road. The line of identical brown doors and windows, like staring faces, has a sullen aspect. No skylarks. The texturized siding is a defeated-looking tan color. There is a small office, dim, but for a glowing television screen. The yard is dust, struggling weeds, trampled gravel. And when looking for a small motel, I usually choose a place with window boxes or at least a few flowers growing in a tractor tire filled with dirt. Feeling hope rise at that small signal of care. But it's late, and Kitsikok is hungry, and I'm disoriented, as one always is, leaving some wild place on the earth and returning to human disorder. The unattractive nature of the towns and buildings seems purposeful. There's a belligerent streak to the ugliness. Or maybe I'm just tired. Here is an island, but of a very different sort. The loneliness of roadside motels steals over me at once. Walking into my room, number 33, interesting, even with Kitsakok's presence to cushion me, the sadness soaks up through my feet. True, I may have dreams here. These places always inspire uneasy nights and sometimes spectacular and even numinous dreams. But they test my optimism. My thoughts grow dreary. The door shows signs of having been forced open, and I can still see the crowbar marks where a lock was jimmied. And oh dear, it is only replaced with a push-in knob that can be undone with a library card or any bit of stiff plastic. I think, as I don't suppose that someone intent on breaking into room 33 would use a library card. Or if they did, I wonder, dragging in one duffel and the diaper bag, plus Kitsakok's football style, Kitsakok football style, would it be a good sign or a bad sign? Would it be better to confront an ill-motivated intruder who is well-read or one indifferent to literature? I rein in my thoughts and get at my bearings. There are touches, although the bed sags and the pickle green coverlet is pilly and suspicious looking. The transparent sheets are tight and clean. A strangely evocative fall foliage scene is set above the bed, hand-painted, signed with a jerky black squiggle. The bathroom shower has a paper sanitary mat picturing a perky mermaid, breasts hidden coyly by coils of hair. The terrifying stain in the center of the carpet is almost covered with a woven rug. And as always on car trips, where I will surely encounter questionable bed covers, I brought my own quilt. There is a bedside lamp with a 60-watt bulb, and once Kitsakok is asleep, I can read. Reading Seaball's Austerlitz is in a cheap motel, insecure, with a chair pushed up beneath the doorknob and the drapes held shut with hair clips, is an experience for which I will always be grateful. Books. Why? For just such a situation, marooned in this uneasy night, shaken by the periodic shudder of passing semi-trucks, every sentence grips me. My brain holds onto each trailing line as though grasping a black rope in a threatening fog. I finish half a page and then read it over again, and then read the next half of the page, and then the next page twice. Not many books can be read with such intimacy, nor are there many so beautifully composed that the writing alone brings comfort. You'll march along with me on book tours because the elaborate twists in George Eliot's sentences provoke in me a mood of concentrated calm. Austerlitz is about the near dissolution of a man's personality during the reconstruction of his memory. Austerlitz, who has forgotten most of his early childhood, follows threads of history, traceries of his own consciousness. He digs through lists of deportees and examines photographs and propaganda movies to find the truth of his origins. He learns that he was sent on a children's transport from Prague to England at the beginning of World War II, and that his mother died in the humanely mechanized and phenomenally cruel model ghetto of Theresienstadt. He understands this slowly. The book moves minutely along this path towards knowledge and seems at every sentence to deviate, but always returns to the unfolding story. It's a very simple book and unbearably profound. Page after page is about how history sinks into the mind, tormentingly sometimes. And what arrests and disturbances truth causes, until finally the human heart can accept its sorrows and heal itself by enduring the unendurable and go on beating. The books we bring to strange places become guides and prevailing metaphors, catch-alls, lenses for new experience. And as I read late into the night, the moths whirling at the spotted shade, this book speaks to me with the melancholy prescience, anticipating 9/11 in the first pages, when Austerlitz speaks of how the smallest buildings, cottages, little pavilions, bring us peace, while we contemplate vast buildings, overdone buildings, with a wonder which is also dawning horror. Quote, for somehow we know by instinct that outside buildings cast the shadow of their own destruction before them. Wow. And are designed from the first with an eye to their later existence as ruin. Wow. I'm going to read that one again. As I read late into the night, moths swirling at the spotted shade, this book speaks to me with melancholy prescience, anticipating 9/11 in the first pages, when Austerlitz speaks of how the smallest buildings, cottages, little pavilions bring us peace, while we contemplate vast buildings, overdone buildings, with a wonder which is also dawning horror. Quote, for somehow we know by instinct that outsized buildings cast the shadow of their own destruction before them and are designed from the first with an eye to their later existence as ruins. The description of the village of Llandwyn in Wales, urged by the waters of a great reservoir, reminds me of the sensations I experience when talking to Bosonaquet about the many settlements and cabins far out on Lake of the Woods, some of them drowned. Like Austerlitz, I too feel as though I've seen the vanished people walking, felt their eyes upon me. And when I stare into the opaque water, they are somehow calmly looking up from their ordinary tasks, which they have carried on below us for thousands of years. I try to stay awake for as long as I can, getting up to wash my face at the rust-stained sink, and every time I turn on the tap, unseen pipes clunk, and finally one page sluices into the next, and I start awake to find I have been holding my book upright, perhaps reading in my sleep, for I don't know if my eyes were even shut. And I wonder as I turn out the light and settle into the sagging mattress if my sleeping self understood what it read, and indeed if I will ever know who I am during these dark hours. Asleep, we are strangers to ourselves. Sometimes, as now, it seems odd that we go on day after day accepting this great dislocation, growing used to it, trusting that our night self resembles our day self, that neither will betray the other come morning. Wow, that's interesting to think about. Ke na wiwanong. Okay. On Minnesota 11, driving east towards the border, crossing at International Falls, I see a large billboard that advertises, quote, a gathering place of historical interest, Kanawiwanong, and I am intrigued as I have some time to dispose of, and I decide to investigate. The road I am directed down is quite deserted, and for many miles I see only pastures, a few tawny brown cows, fence posts, and gravel. Then, suddenly, I turn into a large parking lot filled with cars from as far away as Illinois and Florida. The place is still mysterious, and from the lot I can see only a wooden door and part of a cedar-shake roof. And upon entering the door and facing a sudden and surprising curve of descending stairs, I understand that I've come upon some sort of museum. And as I walk down the long, wide yellow stone staircase, the building opens into a cool, graceful, pleasant interior space divided into display sections, a book and craft shop, and an aquarium filled with live sturgeon, namawag. I'm very glad to see the sturgeon close up and watch them eagerly. They are indeed strangely ancient looking, with their rumpled snouts and whiskers. Their bellies are cool, off-white, and their skins are gray. The color's so soft, and they look painted. They're here in this building because the Rainy River Band of Ojibwe is raising and releasing them into the Rainy River. These young namawag are the size of large walleyes, but they may grow to be underwater giants like the one that Kitsikok and I saw at the Eternal Sands, or even bigger. After looking through the displays of Ojibwe life and at the collections of artifacts, I treat myself to the gift shop. I find a number of handmade moccasins. The word is from Ojibwe, usually spelled makazanan. These locally made makazanan are unusually fine, some made with brain-tanned moose hide, number 13 beads or cut beads, and lined with blanket material or rabbit fur. I pick out several pairs and then find a book of poems, Spirit Horses by an Ojibwe poet I admire named Al Hunter. The woman who handles the sale proudly tells me that she's Al's niece and that he happens to be downstairs. I point out my name on the back cover of Al's book, a blurb And Al comes upstairs and we sit down in a little cafe which serves fresh, beautiful Ojibwe-influenced wild rice soups, casseroles, fruit salads, and we drink the ubiquitous iced tea of this part of Canada. Al and his partner, Sandra, recently completed a walk around Lake Superior to draw attention to its pollution. That's a long walk. Al says the days merged and that the time was beautiful. He works for his band, Rainy River, Ojibwe, on a land claim that has had promising results so far. This center, which is located on land containing huge burial mounds restored to the tribe, is one of those results. He tells me something very striking. He says that when he returned home after his education to work, there were many terrible and pressing needs to address on his reserve: poverty, alcoholism, despair. And so he called a meeting. And at this meeting, he needed to tell people there was something that their reserve gravely needed: a library. Books. Why? Because they are wealth, sobriety, and hope. And Al's reserve now has a library bought with contributions, slowly filling with books. The border crossing. I try not to be nervous, but I can't help it. I'm carrying those eagle spikes, and although I have a right to carry them and I have my band enrollment card, I hate the questioning, the scrutiny, the suspicious nature of the border guards. What I don't expect is that the man, my age, very trim and professional looking in his blue uniform, will question me about my baby. Do you have any proof that you're her mother? I stare at him in shock. It's such a strange question. I have to think. Well, I say, I can nurse her. He stares back at me, gestures to the side of the building. Pull over. Am I going to be required to nurse my baby in front of some border crossing guard? I pull over, wishing that I had a copy of the Jay Treaty, which guarantees Native peoples the right to cross the Canadian-US border without hassle. A woman meets me. I undergo more questioning. I start to grip Kitsikok a little harder in alarm, I suppose, and in response, she holds on to me tightly. The guard asks a series of easy questions, and then suddenly, as though to trip me up, she shoots the question, "And who is this?" at me, indicating Kitsikok. Each time grasping the strategy, I shoot right back, "My daughter?" And each time Kitsikok grips me even tighter. I'm so glad she isn't going through one of those mother rejecting stages or branching out adventurously or growling at me. And she likes to do as a joke right now. Eventually, this sharp-eyed woman clears me, and we've passed some mother-daughter tests. But when I get into the van, I find that I'm actually shaken. For the first time in quite a while, I'm surprised to find that I crave a stiff drink. Yes, I do. A straight shot of really good whiskey and a cigarette. What have they done to me? I say out loud, buckling her in, giving the baby the cell phone and the Chinese blender and her sippy cup, and then buckling myself in and guzzling water from a plastic bottle. It's time to get out of International Falls and back onto a lake. Meeting up again. Sorry, let me just get situated. Okay. Meeting up again. Once again, there is this meeting up uncertainty. I am supposed to rendezvous with members of the Lac Court. Oh, I'm terrible with French. Lac Court Oreille Ojibwe Language Society. We are going to stay together at an island on Rainy Lake among Ernest Oberholzer's thousands of books. There was a phone call, a plan, a lost cell number, a time to meet. The word super stop or stop and super or one stop or super shop and save. Immediately after hanging up, I should have written down the name of the meeting place. And as I enter International Falls, I am more and more confused by the similarity of gas stations, stop names, and supermarkets. They seem to have the same name in various combinations. I make a slow examination of each one, but I don't find my friends. And finally, I haul Kitsikok out, and we do a magnificent shopping at a place called Cherries. All the innovative mix on this trip. One that is nuts, figs, cinnamon chips. We buy milk and a box of root baby crackers. We walk the aisles waiting for our friends until I realize that in 1/2 hour I have to make a boat that will take us out to the island. As it turns out, it was just lateness, an Ojibwe trait so common it is not considered a failing. And I'm relieved to see that everyone is gathered and consolidating gear once I go out to the point from which we will embark. My particular friends are a young couple with a baby boy, just Kiscock's age. They are Ojibwe teachers and very passionate about the language. They speak only Ojibwe to their son and my baby too, and she understands them and has quite a few Ojibwe words. Her shoes are maki for makizanan, and her water is nibi. But we have a long way to go before sentence structure. We are going to drive out in a pontoon boat steered by the caretaker of the island, a very agreeable, sunny-haired woman from Ames, Iowa, named Mary Holmes. Years ago, Mary fell in love with the island of the books and became a caretaker of that island, and is now on the board of the small foundation that administers a tiny trust and takes care of the estate that belonged to Ernest Oberholzer. The trust allows a few small groups to visit their ecologically fragile island. Because Ernest Oberholzer was a close friend of the Ojibwe, the foundation honors that relationship by allowing teachers and serious students of the language, as well as one or two Ojibwe writers, to visit on retreats. Most people who come to Ober Island more than a few times become working members of the loose conglomerate of people who support the place in one way or another. It is the kind of place that inspires a certain energy that I can only term Oberholzian, a combination of erudition, conservationism, nativism, and exuberant eccentricity. That's nice. I must just say that again. It is the kind of place that inspires a certain energy that I can only term Oberholzian, a combination of erudition, conservationism, nativism, and exuberant eccentricity. Perhaps I think the air of tinker toy idealism here has something to do with the confidence of fascinations that occur when Germans and Ojibwe people mix. The place reminds me quite a bit of my own family. Ernest Oberholzer. He was born in 1884, grew up in an upper middle class home in Davenport, Iowa, suffered a bout of rheumatic fever that weakened his heart. And he went to Harvard, where he made friends with bookish people like Conrad Aiken and Samuel Eliot Morrison. His heart kept bothering him. Told by a doctor he had just 1 year to live, he decided to spend it in a canoe. Wow. He traveled 3,000 miles in a summer, paddling a canoe around the Rainy Lake watershed and through the Quetico Superior Wilderness was just the thing for his heart, and so he kept on paddling, and he lived to be almost 93 years old. Ernest Oberholzer packed those years with passions and enthusiasms, ceaseless physical activity, and loving friendships. He never married, though he lived on his island with a woman who supported him and apparently would have liked to tie the knot. He was trained to play the classical violin, and he loved literature, book collecting, landscape architecture, bike travel, and photographing moose. The greatest political act of his life was to take on the massive lumber companies and save the boundary waters, the Quetico Superior Wilderness, I hope for all time. His friendships with the Ojibwe were abiding. He was a devoted and very curious companion. He was attracted to the unknown, to great deeds and exploration. In 1912, at the age of 28, he persuaded an extremely capable 50-year-old Ojibwe man, Tayata Ha-Pasewitong, Billy McGee, to accompany him on an expedition he hoped would make his name as an explorer. He intended to travel the Barrens bounded by Lake Winnipeg, Hudson Bay, and Reindeer Lake. The area was unmapped, unknown, and unexplored since Samuel Hearne's 1770 expedition. They were, of course, going by canoe. Oberholzer wasn't much of a hunter, so they had to pack an inordinate amount of food, 700 pounds, and every portage consisted of 5 round trips. They had a small window of opportunity before the lakes and rivers would freeze solid, stranding them, and so began the journey in late June. By August, they would experience freezing nights and woodlands covered in frost. By September, October, and last November, they would be battling for their lives, filling in blanks on the map by using a compass and watch that his mother had given him. Ober mapped the terrain through which they passed. They paddled steadily and thereby estimated distances hour by hour. Often lost, they desperately navigated mazy lakes, ultimately Newelton or Sleeping Island Lake, searching for a river called the Wiaza that would deliver them in the path towards Hudson Bay. Loneliness, anxiety, and the strangeness of the lake itself worked on Oberholzer, and at times his journal entries took on a desperate, dreamy quality. On the barrens, the men hallucinated, lost themselves, but managed to plunge on. Ober saw trees as city smokestacks, people who weren't there. Ever after, the journey was to haunt Ober and remain mysterious to others. At one point, he climbed an esker and left in a can a note with his last words. In his journal, Ober notes that Billy McGee would tell him how every night he talked in his sleep or made horrible noises. The two came down to the side of Hudson Bay. They missed the last steamer out of the country to run before the lakes and rivers froze over, and so they headed south just a hair before winter, freezing all the way and paddling 14 hours at a stretch. Often through the night, their feet and legs stuffed all around with wild hay. And incredibly, they paddled until the first week of November through snow along the shore of Lake Winnipeg, and at last made the small settlement of Gimli, Manitoba. And there the two beached their canoe, got haircuts, and returned to the world. They had been traveling and portaging nonstop, often deep into the night since June 25th. It was a grueling, original, life-changing feat. Though Ober lectured on the trip, he never managed to write it. Joe Paddock observes in Keeper of the Wild. Though a conflicted desire to do so haunted him into old age, Ober would never publish or even complete a written account of the Hudson Bay trip. Over the years, when he did try to write it, he was overwhelmed with emotion. One is reminded of the Meriwether Lewis's inability to write of his great wilderness adventure. And as with Lewis, Ober's careful journey of the trip may in itself be the significant book he hoped that would one day tell his tale. That book, Toward Magnetic North, had recently been published along with many of the extraordinary photographs that Ober took of the places and the people he encountered. His photographs of a family of Inuit hunters who took them in and guided them to the northeasternmost reach of their village are the most remarkable. In one, an ancient woman, probably about my age, is framed by a huge stack of wood on her back, and she drags herself along or herself with two sticks. Another of a 10-year-old boy to whom his father gave the pipe, Ober offered the family as a gift, smokes that pipe, grazing with shrewd and thoughtful economy into the familiar distance. Ober's house and Ober's books. See, there's like a little door. On reaching the island, I find I am the last to choose a place to stay. I am thrilled to find that no one else has decided to sleep at Oberholzer's house, though each cabin has its own charm. I've always wanted to stay at Oberholzer's. I want to stay among what I imagine must have been his favorite books. The foundation has tried to keep the feeling of Ober's world intact, and so the books that line the walls of his loft bedroom, were pretty much the ones he chose to keep there. Just hundreds out of more than 11,000 on the island. Heavy on Keats. I notice right off as we enter. Volumes of both poems and letters, lots of Shakespeare, a gorgeously illustrated copy of Leaves of Grass, and some shelves in an alcove above the bed, curious volumes on sexuality, including Kraft Ebben. And I take down one work entitled Sin and Sex, and I find that an old letter has been used as a bookmark. I read the letter is from Oberholzer to his mother. The subject of the letter is the stock market. Oh well. I replaced the letter in the book, and I have quilts on the bed, and we lie down with my view from the bed, straight down a rocky channel into a lovely little bay. Both the islands next to this one, also owned by the foundation, are kept wild. This island, Mallard, is planted with triple care, pink petunias and bark planters, baskets of salmon and patiens. Tiny perennial gardens of daisies and lilies are set against the stone walls. It has 7 cabins and 2 outhouses. To call the buildings cabins and the privies outhouses is completely inadequate. I mean, to start with, Oberholzer's house is built against the side of a rock and rises 3 full stories with a surprise sleeping cupola at the top, a secret room that can be reached only through a ladder leading into what looks like a chimney. Isn't that cool? That's so cool. I'm just going to read it. But to call the buildings cabins and the privies outhouses is completely inadequate. To start with, Oberholzer's house is built against the side of a rock and rises 3 full stories with a surprising sleeping cupola on top, a secret room that can only be reached through a ladder leading into what looks like a chimney. For handles, the sturdy riveted doors are fitted with pieces of curved driftwood or antlers. The very first floor, the kitchen, is reached either through a trap door from above or an outside screen door above stone steps that lead directly down to the lake. Next to the kitchen door, against the cool of another rock wall, is an ice house set, disguised by vines that loop over a pale turquoise door. I love this door leading into the stone hill. I have photographed it many times. There is a Japanese tea house at the end of the island, and to reach it, one crosses an arched stone bridge. Another set of stone steps leads into what's called the Roman Bath, a deep tub of silky lake. There is the birdhouse, riding like a Seuss concoction into the piers, story after story, with a zigzag of steps and ladders. As the other cabins are, it's heated with a tiny wood stove. There is one more house made like the others of unpeeled cedar logs. There's a library cabin, which I'll get to, and there are the outhouses. Now, mine is built with a tiny step up, a perfect screen door, a lovely window, and a long view down the center of the channel facing east. We convened to eat in an old 20th century cook's barge used by lumber companies to feed their crews as they ravaged the northern old-growth forests and floated the logs down to the sawmills. Ober had this cook's barge hauled onto the island, and old bell signals meals, original plates and dishes of every charm, depression glass, milk glass, porcelains, and sweet old flowery, unmatched Royal Dalton china dishes crowd the open shelves. A cabin just out front of the cook's barge, hauled there too, was once the floating poorhouse, I am told, and now it houses a piano with 3 neat beds. A child has written a sign tacked to its wall that advises visitors not to be alarmed if they see things they are unprepared to see, like spirits. There's supposed to be a spirit family that inhabits this island. I'll tell you right off, I don't see hide nor hair of the spirits, but I can't speak for Kitsikok. With her still open fontanelle, they might be talking to her or singing her to sleep. Because she sleeps on this island, she takes naps of an unprecedented length and then tumbles into sleep beside me as I read into the night. There is a fever that overcomes a book lover who has limited time to spend on Ober's Island, a fever to read, or at least to open the books. There is no question of finishing or even delving deeply. I have only days. Among the books, I feel what is almost a low swell of grief, a panic. Once the baby is asleep, I vault over to Ober's shelves. I first wash and dry my hands. I just have to, really. I suppose I should be wearing gloves. And then with a kind of binging greed, I start. I take one book off the shelf, sucking what I can of it, replacing it. And this goes on for many hours as I can stand. G.K. Chesterton on William Blake. Ben Jonson's works in 4 volumes, Oxford University, 1811. Where the Blue Begins by Christopher Morley, illustrated by Arthur Rackham. First edition and first printing. An 1851 copy of House of the Seven Gables, and The Voyages of Peter Esprit Radisson, being an account of his travels and experiences among the North American Indians. A wonderful volume, more recent than most, published in 1943 and transcribed from original manuscripts in the British Museum. I keep reading this last book until late at night, the loons in full cry, my mosquito coil threading citronella smoke, and I have to quit, knowing that I must be alert enough tomorrow to feed Kitsikok and take the stones from her mouth. I force myself to sleep, but as I drift away with her foot in my hand, I am led to picture an alternate life. In my imagined life, there's an enchanted interlude. All the children are given a year off from school to do nothing but read. I don't know if they'd actually like this, but in my fantasy, my daughters are exquisitely happy. And we come to the island, and 1 year is given to me also to read. And I am not allowed to write. I am forced to do nothing but absorb Ober Holzer's books every day. I pluck down stacks of books from shelves upon shelves, tacked up on every wall and level of the 7 cabins of Ober's Island. And slowly I go through the stacks, reading here and there until I find the book which I must read every word. And then I do read every word beneath a very bright lamp. And when my brain is stuffed, my daughters and I go swimming, play poker, or eat. Life consists of nothing else. Ober and moose. I find some lovely photographs of moose among the archives. Oberholzer took them. Tracking down, sneaking up on, and photographing moose was a big passion of him. His guide, companion, and mentor, Billy McGee, or Tayata Paswewitong, thought Ober just a little strange, but he went along with it, bringing him within feet of some of the shyest and orneriest creatures of the lake. The photographs that resulted were the first such ever taken of the animal, and Oberholzer became known as a great expert. Keeper of the Wild makes use of notes that Ober took on those photography trips. I think, of course, of the 3 young female moose we saw at Lake in the Woods, those awkward young beauties cavorting in the reeds and so innocent about our approach. Ober wrote beautifully about similarly trusting young bull. Inch by inch, scarcely moving, Billy propelled the canoe forward, while I knelt in the bow, camera in hand. And the sun was fiercely hot, and there was only a breath of breeze. And the little bull several times raised his head and gazed at us wonderingly, and each time Billy stopped paddling. And thus, during the moments when the moose's head was submerged, we advanced till we were only 20 feet away. And the bull edged off a foot or so and turned his back and suddenly faced around again, whined ever so slightly like a dog, and at last, after a moment's reflection, dipped his head under water. I was itching to take his picture, but I noticed something remarkable. Instead of immersing his head completely, as is the custom of the moose when feeding, he left half of his long ears protruding. He was listening, and I was afraid that if I shuddered, he would scamper away. And when he raised his head again, however, I decided to chance it, and I clicked, and he finished and moved away again, and then resumed his feeding. And he seemed reassured, for a third after that, on his knees on the river bottom, and for a second or so, his body was lost to sight. His head came up first, his ears pricked, and he shook, and the ears flashed drolly against his cheeks. When he rose, he looked at us inquiringly, almost mischievously, with his languid brown eyes, and his shaggy winter coat was still clinging in patches to his hindquarters. To my great surprise, he calmly stepped toward us and sniffed with his long snout, and I could have touched him with a paddle. But Billy, always cautious and respectful toward a moose, backed the canoe a few strokes, and thus, for 15 minutes, we played with this strange neighbor. Feasting. The blueberries, Minan, have ripened on the island. The first thing Kitsikok does the next morning is crouch low to the berry bushes and stuff herself with Minan. And I show her how. And this is the one traditional Ojibwe pursuit I'm good at. And now before Kitsikok picks and eats all the blueberries, it is time to feast the first ripening. Rose Tainter, a traditional elder from the Lac Court Orier, prays in Ojibwe Moen with her sacred pipe at breakfast. And we have a huge bowl of blueberries. A spirit dish is prepared. The dish is made up of small portions of the food we'll eat, tobacco alongside the portions. The spirit dish is either left outside for the spirits or burned as an offering. And this is the way the Ojibwe have given thanks for the first berries of the year. After Rose is finished playing and the spirit dish is set outside, we eat. We eat seriously. We eat with attention. We eat with a lot of laughing. It seems to me that Ojibwe people always eat with happy grace. Food is a part of every gathering and ceremony. Even our weekly meetings to learn the language are based around a potluck dinner, mainly centered around casseroles, heavy on wild rice. Today on Ober's Island, breakfast consists of pancakes and Ojibwe maple syrup, scrambled eggs, fresh walleye, breaded and fried, and hash of potatoes, and crisp turnips, and a big bowl of blueberries. And there's also lots more fruit on the side, coffee and black tea. And we'll have a big lunch just a couple hours after breakfast dishes are cleared and washed, and then dinner, which might involve venison sausage, more walleye, boiled cabbage and potatoes, or if we are lucky enough to see Nancy Jones, whatever she has hunted here. Nancy Jones, Ogemawigwanabik, happens to be one of the most extraordinary women I know. For starters, she holds the world's record as the quickest beaver skinner. And I don't know where exactly she learned how to be the world's quickest beaver skinner title, but I am sure that this is the truth. And she makes a few judicious cuts and turns the animal inside out with sleight of hand. And Nancy does exquisite beadwork, placing each tiny cut bead just so on the makazinan of smoked moose hide, trimmed with otter fur and lined with blanket. Nancy has a great laugh and a deep spiritual knowledge, and she is an Ojibwe language teacher and fiercely devoted to Ojibwe culture. Her children are language teachers too, and she has taught them her bush skills. Still, they are amazed at her fortitude and endurance. Nancy has been known to kill, skin, and cart back to her cabin a whole moose and a deer in one day. She can snare rabbits, trap anything from lynx to pine marten. She can shoot the head off a partridge sitting in a tree and probably catch the partridge as it falls too. Ojibwe are meat eaters. That's just how it is. The joke goes, what is an Ojibwe vegetarian called? A poor hunter. Nevertheless, it was Nancy's deer haunch and a fat string of bass 3 years ago that changed my then youngest daughter, Isa, from a supermarket carnivore to a thoughtful vegetarian. It was either the deer haunches or the ribs. Anyway, on our last visit to Ober's Island, Isa made a decision from which she's never deviated. And I was amazed that a 10-year-old could decide with such conviction. She won't even eat a fish after she went to the dock to check on Nancy's stringer. And later she said to me that one of the fish had looked up at her, and that did it. It must have been a hard-hearted little person, because as the granddaughter of a pair of butchers, I helped kill chickens and watched from a corner of the slaughterhouse as my uncle knocked sheep, shot cows, scalded and gutted dead pigs. And yet it has taken my daughter Asa to make me really attempt anything like a consistently vegetarian set of habits. And it started out purely because I felt bound to support her tenderness on behalf of animals. At any rate, although killing and eating wild game is for the Ojibwe a spiritual as well as a delectable enterprise, there is no vegetarianism this year on Ober's Island. Nancy and her son, Peba Mibines, are running an Ojibwe language camp this summer on her land, almost a 45-minute boat ride from Ober's Island. And they come to stay for a night, but all the game is left at the language camp. And so we eat the most incredible spaghetti bolognese. Maybe it's the red pepper flakes in the sauce or the type of onion. I don't know. Maybe it's the air. Maybe it's the mosquitoes and how we are free of them in the well-screened kitchen. Nancy remembers Ernest Oberholzer very well. He makes eggs for her family on their first visit when they paddled over and tied their canoe to his dock. And in Oberholzer's photo archive, there are dozens of pictures of Nancy's family, her late husband's family, and of Nancy as a child, strong-minded, even then, grinning, wearing a soft red woolen hat. Pippa Mibines touches a picture on the wall. I do not recognize it. It is a photograph of Billy McGee, the man who guided and paddled with Oberholzer on the great 1912 adventure, is a close ancestor. Mang. A hot wind blows over the island, and Kitsikok and I are in and out of the water all afternoon. We edge ourselves carefully down a stone stairway into the cool, tea-colored water of Rainy Lake. Pushing off, we float together in the channel, sighing in dreamy relief. We bob along in our life jackets, talking part Ojibwe, part English, and part mother-baby nonsense. The world is perfect. The shadows are long, but on rocks they still burn like iron. The sun's a fierce gold. Baby and I watch the silhouette of a big loon approach down the channel between the islands. It comes nearer and nearer, as silent as we are. And then Mang is abnormally close, closer, too close. And again, I am filled with the now familiar sense of uneasy assessment. That beak looks sharp. Will it pet Kitsikok? And the loon's eyes are very red. But the loon isn't going to poke my baby, of course. It only circles, coming close enough for us to count the white spots on its back and regard the spectral pupil of its weird, reflective eye. Again, I marvel how animals seem attracted to the baby. And once we have emerged from the water and are drying off in the light breeze, I asked Nancy Jones if she saw the loon swimming with us. I asked modestly, sure, that she'll tell me that Kitsikok has some unusual power that attract Mang. Gigete, I saw it. He liked your life jackets. Our life jackets? Yeah, they're red. That's how we used to catch loons and eat them, Nancy says. We use red things. They'll come close and investigate anything red. And then she adds, we don't eat them anymore. How did they used to taste? I asked her. Baby. buy a book the time I visited Ober Island. It was stuck away in a little cabin I haven't described, one devoted alone, the library. My find was a little pamphlet-sized, inconsequential-looking book, covered with a black paper that looked like oilcloth. I slipped it from the shelf and opened it. Tristram Shandy, one of the first novels in the English language. As it was originally published in serial form, this was but a portion of the first edition and the first printing. Lawrence Stern had signed the title page. I had a strange, covetous, Gollum-like feeling as I held this book. My precious. I suppose it was like the beginning of the sort of emotional response to books that drives those collectors you hear about occasionally to fill their apartments with books until there are only book tunnels to walk through and the floors eventually collapse onto their neighbors. Of course, I have to see Tristram Shandy again. I want to visit this book, and I also want to make sure I really saw it. But this time I can't find the book, although I crawl with Kitsikok on hands and knees looking for likely places it could have been stashed. Its absence bothers me. Although I'm helplessly in the grip of other books now and currently in love with a corny purple edition of Caitlin's journals, I keep sneaking around the bottom of the shelf where I found my precious peeking over other books behind the shelves like a dog sure that it will find a bone hidden years before. Mary Holmes goes through the catalog with me, and that particular volume is mentioned, which doesn't mean she tells me it wasn't actually there, so I might have seen it. This is for me like a birder having possibly photographed an ivory bill and then losing the film. I'm chagrined. Why didn't I do something about that book? I mean, show it to someone, make certain it was cared for. But I know that the answer is I didn't, because I am in a somewhat uneasy agreement with the spirit of the island, which is to let the books exist as they were meant to exist, to be read, to be found, and then unfound, to have their own life. Somehow, that also puts me in conflict with a piece of my heart. For I also want books to be protected from people like me, who itch to hold them, might overwhelm them, even the strictest conscience. And even now I can feel that the line is thin, especially when you can't find Tristram Shandy. Signed, goddammit, I'm positive. And Mary tells me that Ober had left no will regarding the island and his books and cabin, so that 10 years passed while all the legalese was sorted out, and during those years, the books were alone. I brood on this, the books. Alone in the cold and through the humid summers, alone in the cabins for 10 years as roofs collapsed, alone as squirrels invaded and dismantled 18th century bindings to line their nests with rare pages. I am afflicted with such melancholy at the thought of the books all alone on the island that I have to walk back to Ober's house to nap with Kitsikok to settle my mind. The whole island filled with books and no one to care for them. I mean, I would have liked to have been there. I can imagine it as something like living in a great Cornell box. Only Joseph Cornell's visual themes were white spheres and tiny glasses and peeling cubicles and star maps that suggested vast compressions of time and space. And here, the themes would be the books, the words stacked endlessly, spine to spine, margin to margin, peeling, curling, waiting in a thrilling passivity for someone like me. There was an original Edward Curtis portfolio of portraits of American Indians among the books. I'm glad that I don't know what else. I mean, some of the most valuable were sold once the little foundation of Oberholzer's friends and supporters was formed. In a panic of retrieval, some were brought back, but a piece of the careful intention and depth of Ober's reflection was lost. Still, the collection is for me both a caution and an inspiration. It is surely a good thing that Oberholzer devoted only a portion of his vast energy to book collecting. I mean, he was a dedicated bibliophile, careful and disciplined, ordering books from London booksellers with great specificity and detail, and receiving notes and invoices in return, some of which are still tucked into the pages of his books. Nicholas Basbane's wonderful book on obsession, A Gentle Madness, begins with a description of the difference between a bibliophile and a bibliomaniac. With thought, patience, and discrimination, book passion becomes the signature of a person's character. When out of control and indulged to excess, it lets loose a fury of bizarre behavior. The bibliophile is the master of his books, the bibliomaniac, their slave. The German bibliographer Hans Bohata steadfastly maintained, though the dividing line can be too blurry to discern. Whatever the involvement, however, every collector inevitably faces the same harsh reality. After years spent in determined pursuit, a moment arrives when the precious volumes must pass to other shelves. Some accept the parting with calm and foresight. Others ignore it entirely, and some erect grand repositories as monuments to their taste. Others release their treasures with the whispered hope that they reach safe harbor in the next generation. Whatever Oberholzer's intentions were, I'm happy that his island is still filled with the books he pursued and acquired. Other than actual writing, the books a person leaves behind reflect most accurately the cast of that person's mind. If his spirit is with the spirit family living on the island, as some believe, then I'm sure that Ober misses his chief treasures, but still feels relieved that the collection is more or less intact. For his assemblages do reflect his character as best collections do. His books on exploration, the great north of Canada and the Arctic, and his painstakingly procured works on Native American life, as well as the volumes of poetry he so loved, and the works in German, and the books on music, probably reflect as much as anyone can know of him. Ober and the Ojibwe. One of the reasons I think that Ober so loved and was fascinated by the Ojibwe is that he loved the books in the people. Let me say that again. One of the reasons I think that Ober so loved and was fascinated by the Ojibwe is that he loved the books in the people. He loved the oral tradition of storytelling, where the person becomes the book, as in Fahrenheit 451. His Ojibwe name, Adizukan, means traditional story. As Pebamidines tells it, Oberholzer was always entering a circle of Ojibwe asking eagerly, Adizukan? And so, as Ojibwe do, he was affectionately nicknamed, and he recorded several stories but never did complete a collection or indeed write the books he meant to about the Ojibwe. He hadn't perhaps the degree of passivity it takes to actually sit down and write a book, or he hadn't the patience maybe to sit down long at all. His phenomenally active life benefited his Ojibwe friends in many ways, not the least of which is in the area of conservation. And now, in the ongoing hospitality, the board of the Oberholzer Foundation has shown toward the Ojibwe people, Ojibwe writers and language teachers, storytellers. During this retreat to the island, for instance, I am able both to take notes for this book and to work with Keller Papp and Lisa Ronge on details of the first book that our nascent publishing house, Birch Bark Books, will publish. It is a book by a gentle and deeply knowledgeable Ojibwe elder called Nawiginzis. Ober definitely would have added this book to his collection. And as I leave, I promise to send it, this one too, up north to the island of the books. So I think I will stop there on chapter 4 of Books and Islands by Louise Erdrich. And we have chapter 5 next, an acknowledgement. So there's probably just one more day of reading. All right. Thanks everybody for joining.